The third and the biggest reason why people actually want to shift to the Middle East is that it does not require massive investments. If you look at top 5 countries that remit to India, 3 of them are in the Middle East. This conclusively proves that the job market for Indians in the Middle East is massive, it's growing, and it would continue to grow. If you're someone who is interested in working outside India, then you must seriously look at the job market in the Middle East. Now, why do I say it? Of course, I'm going to explain that entire scenario on this video in detail. Just a very quick note here is that the Middle East job market is designed in such a way that Indians can shift to the Middle East without the student visa route. What I mean by that is that, for example, if you're looking to shift in the US or if you're looking to shift in Europe, then essentially the route is that you have to go study at a university, get the student visa, then convert that visa to an employer. So that's the big step because you need to make so much expenditure. But in the Middle East, the scenario is different. You can actually directly find jobs in the Middle East. So on this video, I'm going to cover the specifics of the job market in the Middle East. Just a very humble request that if you like this type of content, please like this video. It would indicate to me that I should continue to make these type of videos. So it would act as a reference point for me to curate my content. So with that said, let's jump into this video. So there are 5 specific points that I would like to cover on this video. The first point is that why is the Middle East market growing and why are there so much demand for jobs? Why do people actually want to shift there? Second, I'm going to look at the supply side. Why is it that the governments in the Middle East are able to create so many jobs and revolutionize different industries? Third, we are going to take a look at major industries and major job types. Fourth, we are going to take a look at the visa situation in the Middle East. And finally, I'm going to leave you with some job search strategies and tips. Now, the job market of any country is developed due to strong supply of intelligent people who want to actually go to that country and work, and the demand that is being created by the governments. Are they able to provide enough jobs? When these two power combines, it creates magic in the job market. Now, let's first understand from the supply side that why people, intelligent people, want to actually move to the Middle East and work in countries like UAE. Now, the first and foremost reason is very simple, that several countries in the Middle East, such as UAE, they have zero personal income tax. Now, you might be surprised to learn that, for example, if you're working with McKinsey in Scandinavian country, you would be paying 45% tax. Right? But if you're working in Dubai, you would be paying zero tax. So McKinsey pays in terms of PPP, purchasing power parity. So if you're working in UAE or if you're working in Sweden, you would essentially be getting similar salaries, but because people in Dubai do not have to pay taxes, they would end up making 45-50% more money compared to their Swedish counterparts. Now, obvious question here would be that, hey Akshat, why is it that Middle East countries do not levy any personal income tax? The answer is very simple, that these were oil-rich economies. They still are very oil-rich and natural resource-rich countries, and they don't need to levy taxes on the people who are working in these countries. This is the most obvious answer. But second, and a more important answer here is that there is a systemic play here, that the Middle Eastern governments actually want to employ good people. They want people to come to their hubs because you need to think about it this way, that majority of the Middle Eastern countries are super rich in terms of the natural resources, be it oil, natural gas, etc. But the living conditions were not conducive. For example, it gets extremely hot in the Middle East. So majority of the people would not want to go there, right? So it acted out as a tax incentive structure combined with the richness of these countries, which made it a big hub as a tax saving hub, and people actually wanted to move here. The second reason why people want to move to the Middle East is the convenience and the multicultural nature of these nations. For example, if you move to the US or Europe, then majority of the Indians would find it as a cultural shock in the sense that they would have to do their own work, right? Majority of the household work, because we have grown with certain conveniences from that perspective. But if you move to the Middle East, that is not a cultural shock, because in the Middle East, you can still find housemaid. There are still people whom you can employ, pay money to get your house fixed, so on and so forth. So that becomes slightly easy. So that cultural shock is not there. That's one. The second is the location advantage in the sense that, for example, the tourist visa to Dubai or Middle East countries is very, very easy to get and very quick to get. So people feel a little bit safer and it becomes easy for them to travel from India to the Middle East. The flight timings are much more conducive. These are not very long duration flights. The family feels a little comfortable that, hey, you're still close to India. So from that perspective, people actually want to shift to the Middle East. The third and the biggest reason why people actually want to shift to the Middle East is that it does not require massive investments. Now, I covered this point briefly on the introduction of the video. I'll explain it again. So essentially, if you're looking to shift to Europe or if you're looking to shift to the US, what usually ends up happening is that you have to actually go invest money studying at a university, first on a student visa, then look for a job, build your local network, and then you finally get a job, and then you get some kind of visa. For example, in US, you get H-1B visa. But in the Middle East, you can actually find a job sitting right here in India if you play your cards right. The important point to note here is that you don't need to make that student visa investment. So you don't need to pay insane amount of fees to different universities just to shift to another country. But having said this, just a very brief note here that if you have graduated from top tier universities, for example, INSEAD has a campus in the Middle East. Now I have a lot of friends who have graduated from Harvard, Stanford, Wharton, and they are working in the Middle East. The point is that if you're looking at elite jobs with companies like McKinsey, Google, EY, Parthenon, etc., then graduating from top universities still helps. But the important point I want to communicate is that if you're just looking to shift outside India, then shifting to Middle East is not that complex compared to some other countries. And you need not necessarily make that study abroad investment. Now, if you ask yourself a very simple question that why is it that the Middle East countries are able to create so many jobs and why is the government so proactive there? The answer is very simple, and I will read out a very brief statement for you. UAE is ranked among the top 20 for global service businesses according to Kearney, the top 30 of the World Economic Forum's most networked countries, and in the top quarter as the least corrupt country as per the TI's corruption index. Now, given the geographical location of the Middle East countries, these usually act as the center hub for majority of the trade and commerce that happens across the world. For example, you might have heard of something called a Suez Canal. Now, through Suez Canal, majority of the ships that actually carry cargoes travel. Middle East countries, as a result of their geopolitical location, becomes a major trading hub and trade and commerce center. Now, the geopolitical standing is just one part of the entire equation. There is another system at play here. So what happened between 2007 and 2010 was that these Middle Eastern countries were going through an oil crisis. Now, the price of the oil tanked, and majority of these countries, which were oil rich, they actually started making a lot of loss, which acted as a jolt and a point of realization for majority of these governments that, hey, we need to diversify our economy outside the oil economy. So they started focusing massively post 2010 on a bunch of sectors. For example, e-commerce, healthcare, technology. For example, cybersecurity is becoming one of the top-notch destinations for majority of the tech players to establish their stronghold and foothold and their corporate headquarters in the Middle Eastern countries. So in short, the geopolitical location of these Middle Eastern countries, the flow of trade and commerce, combined with the fact that these countries are diversifying their economy outside their oil economy, is proving to be a boon for the job market. Now let's move on to looking at specific industries that are growing in the Middle East. Now let's understand that which industries in the Middle East are growing and booming. So first and foremost, you need to understand that in the Middle East, there are primarily two types or two segments of jobs. One would be called as lower end jobs. These would be construction related jobs, or these would be labor related jobs. And again, there is a lot of bad stuff that happens in this domain. So you should be very careful before you make that move to Dubai or any Middle Eastern country, that if you're going for these low-end employment opportunities to the Middle East, it's okay to go, but don't pay money to people upfront and don't engage in these kind of nefarious activities, so to say, because you might lose your passport, you might get stuck in the Middle East, and a lot of bad stuff can happen. So if you know someone who's looking for such opportunities, be very mindful that if you're looking at low-end opportunities, never pay money to anyone just to shift to Dubai. That's one. The other type of jobs would be high-end jobs. So this is what I will cover on this segment. So high-end jobs would be jobs in technology. For example, Google, Facebook, Amazon. These would be jobs in consulting, BCG, Bain, McKinsey. These would be private equity, VC funds like Sequoia Capital. These would be high growth startups. So there are a lot of startups that are coming out and are gaining a lot of prominence in the Middle Eastern region. So all these are high-end employment opportunities. Now, in my personal opinion, three specific sectors are gaining a lot of prominence in the Middle East. One is consulting, second is technology, and third is healthcare. So I will talk about these three sectors very briefly. Now, if you take a look at the consulting industry is growing massively in the Middle East. The reason again ties into what I was saying on the opening, that Middle East is actually going through a tectonic shift in terms of diversifying their economy from being an oil-based economy to economy of different sectors. So therefore, consulting companies end up getting a lot of work, and therefore you will see a bunch of consulting companies opening their offices here, and almost every major consulting firm has an office in the Middle East, and that office size is also quite big. Now within consulting, the best part is that in addition to participating on traditional consulting projects like technology, media, telecom, Indians or international students can actually work on government related projects while working with these consulting companies. So this gives a massive boost in terms of your employability chances here. Also keep in mind that English is the primary mode of communication, so there are no language barriers. Therefore, an industry like consulting for international students thrives and it succeeds. Again, I would pause here and I would ask you to like this video and support this video. If you support this type of content, it would indicate to me that you would want me to make these type of videos. Also, if there are any specific destinations that you would like me to cover, be it Australia, Canada, let me know. I will definitely make a video on that. Next, let's take a look at the finance industry in the Middle East. Now, Middle East has a very booming finance industry. The reason again is twofold. One is that there are a lot of startups that are coming up in the Middle East. They require financing, they require structural support. So a booming tech market is developing, which actually supports the finance industry. That's reason number one. And reason number two is that government actually ends up spending a lot of money in terms of structuring these startups, making investment in these startups. So they require investment banks to work directly with the government to facilitate such investments. For example, Dubai has a very big sovereign wealth fund and they make investments all across the globe in terms of supporting startups. So because of which the finance industry is thriving. Additional peripheral point why the finance industry is thriving in the Middle East is very simple, that in the Middle East, the tax structure is very lax and also it's very easy to set up companies. Therefore, since many corporations want to shift to the Middle East, the finance industry grows massively. Now let me finally talk about logistics and operations space. Now if you're an engineer and if you're looking to work in the Middle East, then most likely you will end up finding opportunities in engineering, construction management, logistics, operations, transport. These are booming industries again because of the geopolitical and geographical location of the Middle East, that such high volume of business in physical format in forms of cargoes, etc. passes through Suez Canal. Given the proximity to Middle Eastern countries, there are a lot of opportunities in terms of logistical management, transportation, construction. So therefore, these industries would continue to grow and thrive in the Middle East. Now let's very quickly talk about the visa situation in the Middle Eastern countries. Now first and foremost, your work permit must be sponsored by your employer. So if, for example, McKinsey or Google hires you, then they must be the ones sponsoring your visa. Now this brings us to the next question that, hey Akshat, why would a company want to hire an Indian in the Middle East? The reason is that majority of the companies, for example, Google, McKinsey, they are looking to offshore a lot of work. Now Middle East is a perfect hub because they understand that they can bring on a lot of people from diverse nations like India, a bunch of Southeast Asian countries. They can recruit talent from these countries. They can use the low tax rates in the Middle East and bring people on there and create a massive workforce in the Middle East. And again, this workforce has close proximity to Europe office, US office, etc. So this is a win-win situation. On one hand, you have companies that are able to take advantage of the low tax rates available in the Middle Eastern countries and tax incentives and different SEO, SEZs that have been created. And on the flip side, even people from India or Southeast Asia who want to leave from these countries and go to the Middle East, they are able to find employment. So it creates a massive win-win situation for both the parties involved. Now this is evident from this particular article. India and Southeast Asian countries cover approximately 45% of middle management talent for GCC region now. This is due to the fact that UAE governments have instituted reforms like Golden Visa, Remote Work Visa and Multiple Entry Visa, and are also attracting a lot of expats from Indian and Southeast Asian offices to work in Dubai. The last point here is that we must also understand that how the citizenship scenario in the Middle East is going to play out. Very recently, the UAE government for the first time in history announced that it will grant citizenship to foreign residents for the first time, provided that they add value to the Gulf estate. So all in all, the situation is that the government is actually going through transformative shift, which is creating massive number of jobs, and there are people who actually want to shift to these countries. So this creates a beautiful ecosystem, which is leading to a lot of jobs in the market. Now, in terms of exploring job search opportunities in the Middle East, there are few specific points that you must remember. First and foremost, that taking internal referrals is the key to finding jobs in the Middle East. So if you're looking to work in the Middle East, try contacting people on LinkedIn, try to search for them, building relationships with them, and figuring a way to get internal referrals and responses. That will improve your odds massively sitting in India and then landing a job in Dubai. Number 2, you must have a very good answer to why you want to shift to the Middle East. You can't say that, hey, because the tax rates are 0, therefore I want to shift to the Middle East. No, that would not work. That would be a really bad answer. You need to explain how your work, whatever you have done up until this stage, how is that going to add value to the Middle Eastern economy? That is going to be a very important answer and response. The third job search strategy that I would like to explain is you can utilize the tourist visa option that Middle East countries give. Now it's very easy to get tourist visa, so you can utilize that tourist visa, go to these Middle Eastern countries, attend some conferences. Now Middle East organizes tons and tons of conferences, right from startups to technology to blockchain to cryptos, etc. Depending on the space in which you are interested, you can go and attend these conferences, build your network, and then try to get a job. Again, the final point is that use LinkedIn really well, right? If you know how to use LinkedIn, how to build a relationship with a recruiter and network with people effectively, you will find great opportunities in terms of finding work in the Middle East. So I wish you the best. I hope you like this video. Please give it a thumbs up. That would mean a lot to me. And please indicate in the comments what video you would want me to make next.